Hi there, this is Adam Jones from SBS BoatLife. I'm here with Ian Harris. We're at the Marine Power Suzuki Angling Zone and we are in the Bullard's Gin slot at the end of the day, which is one of my favourites, so that we can sit here and have a glass of this fabulous Bullard's Gin.
Absolutely.
Great to see you, mate.
Cheers, Adam.
Cheers. So Ian is here to talk to us today about kayak fishing. You may know Ian from various places. You might know him as Dizzyfish on Instagram and the social media side of things, but obviously Ian has been around kayak fishing and angling for a long, long time, along with every member of the Hobie team, it has to be said. So thanks very much for joining us.
You're making me feel very old, older than I already am.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure.
And I'm really excited to have a chat. We've spoken about this quite a lot on the run-up, that we just want to talk about fishing. I think that's what we'll end up doing.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Bit of fishing shizzle.
Exactly.
Can't be a bit of fishing sizzle.
Exactly. Wicked. Well, let's tell us a bit about you and obviously your Hobie kayak journey, I guess.
Yeah. So, and it has been a bit of a journey. And I've taken my fellow kayak fisherman, David here, my teammate. He's been on that journey too. We've been all over the world. I think we've kayak fished in 5 continents, all over the place.
Amazing.
And some brilliant adventures. Caught some amazing fish along the way as well.
Yeah. I can imagine. I think the thing is, what I see from your fishing, and we'll go through lots of it, but it's that kind of progressive journey of starting with the pike and perch on the canal, then working out a way to float on the water, aka a kayak, and then that journey just moving from bigger and bigger and bigger and more ridiculous fish. I mean, we've got some photos at the beginning, which I'm sure you'll come back to, but skate, marlin, is that
skate, marlin, roosterfish, kingfish, sharks, and big sharks.
Amazing.
Just about everything you can think of, really.
So what is it like playing a big fish on one of these kayaks?
Well, there's a phrase in kayak fishing circles, a sleigh ride.
Right.
Okay, so when we talk about a sleigh ride, what that basically means is, you're in your 12-foot bit of plastic floating around, and you've hooked a big fish, and you just basically hang on. It takes you for a sleigh ride. There's not much you can do. If you reel, you're reeling yourself close to the fish, but that fish is running faster than you can paddle. So you basically just hang on and enjoy the sleigh ride.
It's amazing. Well, it's almost like I've seen some videos of them going great white shark fishing off these big research boats, and they throw in a buoy behind it, and then another buoy and another buoy and another buoy.
You're going to need a bigger boat.
Yeah, essentially you're just the buoy behind this fish.
Basically, and actually the fishing, it does act as a brake, so it does tire the fish. When I caught, I went to Mexico, hooked. In fact, I actually hooked 2 marlin at the same time, one on each rod. So I was like Stretch Armstrong. They both went in different directions, and I was holding on to these rods, thinking, well, what do I do next? And
so, 2 marlin at the same time on a kayak.
Yeah.
There can't be many people that have experienced. So, just talk us through the scenario.
So I paddled out, obviously hoping to catch marlin. I was using live bait. I had one rod that I was trolling, and the other rod was just dangling in the water next to the kayak. I'd stopped for a break, hadn't had any luck. I was getting a bit kind of despondent, thinking I was not around here, so someone's spinning me a line. And whilst I was having a break, looked out in front of the kayak and actually spotted a marlin. So I sight cast one of these live baits, literally flicked out this live bait to it, and actually watched as it came in, grabbed the live bait, I think it was a ballyhoo or something, grabbed this ballyhoo and just took off. And I thought, wow, this is crazy. And then just as the kayak started to accelerate, I got slammed by the side of the kayak, and I was like, what's going on? Almost capsized me. And I realised that another marlin had come in and grabbed the bait that was just dangling in the water next to the kayak. So that grabbed that bait, and that went off in a different direction. So I'm holding these rods, like a crazy person, thinking, well, what am I going to do? Luckily, one of my friends came along, grabbed one of the rods, and he got towed one way. I got towed another way, and after about, pretty sure I must have travelled probably about 1.5 miles.
Ridiculous.
And then managed to get the fish in. We got some pictures. Got a little bit of video. And then ridiculous. Released it and watched it swim away, which is pretty awesome. And then sat there pinching myself, thinking, did that actually just happen?
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, I'm getting distracted as well by these photos. I mean, look at that peacock bass. Yeah, is that Florida?
That was actually in Florida, not the Amazon as you might think. That's the canals
in
not far from Miami.
Amazing.
I had a slam that day, so I had that was actually a trophy peacock as well. So I was very lucky to get that one. Again, that was sight cast as well. I actually spotted that fish, so that was quite satisfying. And the same day I had a largemouth bass, and can never remember the name. It's one crazy fish there. It's not a native, but it swims backwards and it looks mad. Sometimes you see them in aquariums. Knife fish, thank you, David.
Right,
clown knife fish.
Right.
And that jumped out a few times and did its best to pull the kayak around.
Like I said, very difficult not to get distracted. Is that a bronze whale?
That I think is a black tip.
Black tip, yeah.
And that I've got a good friend called Brian Nelly, and Brian's, as well as being a friend, he's also a kayak fishing guide in Florida. There was a clown knife fish.
Yeah.
And he's got this great camera where you can take pictures half above water and half below.
Yeah.
And that first shark, I hooked into it, and actually I was reeling in a bonito, and the shark grabbed the bonito, and then led me a merry dance. Brian came up next to me and laughed and said, "That's a small one," and I said, "No, I don't think so. It's actually quite a big shark. You know, I caught sharks in the UK and taupe and blue sharks, things like that. But I was thinking, well, that's not small. That's a sizable fish."
Yeah.
So Brian thought it was hilarious. I think he thinks English. Most people around the world generally would be cursing if they caught a shark.
Yeah.
I was happy as Larry. I was thinking, this is great. You know,
Yeah.
I'm being dragged around by this big shark. This is fantastic.
Yeah.
So Brian, he just sort of let me get on with it. I got the thing in. We took some pictures. And I said to Brian, that shark, that wasn't small. That was over 100 pounds. And Brian said, no, mate, that's small. I don't know what he's talking about. But then later that same day, I'd hooked another bonito, and I saw a commotion where I'd hooked it, and I could hear Brian shouting in the background, but I couldn't hear what he was saying. And I hooked in, it just went solid, and I thought, oh, hang on, that's a bit different.
Yeah.
And then it just started running, and there was absolutely nothing I could do. This thing was going so quick. It was as much as I could do just to keep the kayak on keel and not to be pulled out of the kayak. It was doing 7 or 8 knots. This thing was like crazy fast, and I could hear Brian again. He was screaming and shouting. He was trying to catch up with me, but I was going so quick he couldn't catch up. And I thought, it's got to be something crazy. Big shark. All sorts starts going through your mind, and then it came off, and I thought, I was actually a little bit relieved.
Yeah.
And I was shouting to Brian, saying, "No, don't worry, it's come off. Don't worry, Brian, it's fine, it's come off." And he was still shouting, and he was like, what's he saying? And then he got a bit closer, and then I heard him shout, "It's still on, it's coming towards you." And I literally had that Jaws moment where I looked and actually saw this fin coming straight towards the kayak as well. And I was like, oh my God, what do I do? And before I knew it, this shark had gone underneath the kayak, and obviously I'm still attached. Brian caught up with me and just cut the line. But as this shark went underneath the kayak, I mean, it was vast. Like across the back was, more than the width of the kayak. I was just looking at this shape go underneath, just thinking, holy cow, this thing was fast. Brian cut the line and the thing disappeared, and then he looked at me and he went, that was a big one. And I said, how big was that, do you reckon? He goes, I don't know, he goes over 500 pounds. But,
yeah, that'll do. Was it a bull?
I think it was a bull shark. And he said to me, you don't want to mess with them. And I said, well, I don't really want to mess with any of them. He said, oh no, they're quite belligerent in terms, if you look at all the sharks, they're not one you want to mess with. So.
No, you don't want them chomping on the side of your kayak and messing you up.
And that day, we had to move because there was just shark. Every time I caught a bonito, I just got sharks straight away.
It's a crazy part of the world down there. I've not fished, but I know a lot of people that have, and it's pretty mental. I mean, to be honest, I'm kind of gobsmacked by some of the. I mean, we've spoken a fair bit, and obviously we do a lot of freshwater angling and have a kind of common interest on that side. But that marlin story is genuinely mad.
Yeah, it is mad. And then the best bit was I got back to the mothership, and the skipper, Mexican skipper, I got back onto this boat, and he just went. He looked at me and went, "El Dizzy!" And we got back to the hotel that evening, and there were a lot of, we were doing things on a real shoestring. Didn't have a lot of money. We were doing everything on the cheap. But this hotel, the other kind of people staying at this hotel, most of them were like rich American businessmen and stuff. They paid thousands of dollars a day to go out in these crazy boats. And normally when you sit down for a meal, they'd all be bragging about what they caught, and the two crazy English fishermen would be sat in the corner just sort of thinking, "Oh, I wish we could have caught marlin." Well, that evening, I think we were the only ones that caught marlin, and they all these rich American guys were coming over and shaking our hands and saying. And a couple of them had seen me being towed around like a crazy person, and they were like, "Fair play, you crazy English people." I think that's that now. There's probably a whole group of Americans who just literally their view of Englishmen are just like these crazy fools in kayaks getting towed around by sort of mental fish.
Well, it's probably the ultimate compliment, isn't it?
It was good.
It was
amazing. It was quite nice. Yeah.
And so this is the UK.
That's back to the sunny UK.
Yeah. Is that
that's a blonde ray.
Yeah.
I've caught those in several different places. I think that might have been Wales or South Devon, maybe.
Yeah. Big tope.
That was my first ever tope. So that was way back. 2012, I think.
Wow.
And that was a proper baptism of fire. So, I'd just taken up kayak fishing. I'd probably only been kayak fishing for, I don't know, maybe 6 months, something like that. And I'd seen, there weren't, at that stage, Adam, there weren't very many people kayak fishing in the UK. It was more of a, it was a bit of a thing in the US and a bit of a thing in Australia. But in the UK, I'm sure David would testify to this, there wasn't really a thing, was it, at that time? There weren't many people doing it, so you really had to search to find out all about it and to find out what people were up to. But there were a real small band of people. David was one, and there were a few others. They were doing some groundbreaking stuff, and one of the things that they were doing was landing tope from a reef mark in West Wales. So they'd go out in their little kayaks. And at that time, we didn't have all the high tech that we've got now. It was literally just a kayak with a crazy dude perched on top, and you go out and anchor up on this reef, and basically sit around and wait for your reel to start singing. And it was happy times. It was. But imagine yourself. You're a newcomer. You wasn't that au fait with kayak fishing. I wasn't hugely confident. The people that I was fishing with at that time were kind of. To me, they were sort of my heroes at that time. I got to fish with these guys, so they sort of took me under their wing, and I got to fish with them. And they would tell me. I remember having a discussion like this actually in the back of a camper van, drinking cider with these guys, and saying, what do I do if I hook one of these tope? And they were taking me through it, and I thought I'm a pretty logical kind of guy. I had it all in my head. Had it all planned out, and I got out there, and I was like, I've got it all straight. Had all my stuff and my tackle, had it all lined up, everything was ready. And then the clicker on the reel started, and I was like, oh, hang on a minute, and then it just, literally, this thing just took off, and then I actually watched it breach.
Really?
This tope actually jumped out of the water, and it was all a bit of a blur. I remember hooking into it, and all this stuff that I had in my head
melted.
It all just went out the window.
I
just completely panicked, and I don't know what I was doing. I know one of the guys afterwards saying, I don't know how you did that. And I was like, I honestly don't really have much of a recollection of what actually happened. I remember getting the tope alongside, and one of the guys trying to. I think he was coming in alongside to try and help me out, but before he had a chance to help me out, he said to me, "You just grabbed it and hauled it onto the kayak," and it was thrashing around. It bit a hole in my dry suit, so I was quite lucky in a way. I got some pictures and a bit of video, And I can remember the adrenaline was just insane. I remember putting it back and watching it swim away. I think the video's on YouTube, and I think you can just see me there, just like whooping like a crazy person.
Yeah.
You know, it's like it was fantastic. You know, I look back now, and I've caught a lot of big fish since, but that was a bit special because it was in the UK, and just because it was almost like a rite of passage at that time to catch a tope from the kayak. Now it's sort of run of the mill. The guys, you know, lots of people do it, but at the time, you know, it was a big deal.
It's very cool. Well, that's what happens in fishing, isn't it? You start kind of, everything becomes exciting, you move on to the next exciting thing, but those moments, those kind of seminal moments, I guess, where you feel that childlike buzz, you'll remember those for the rest of your life, and that sounds like one of those moments.
Yeah, I don't think you ever forget things like that.
No,
it's strange. Yeah.
So amazing. Well, we're getting to the kind of the busy part of the show where there's going to be loads of music starting. So what I want to do is kind of, if there's any questions from anybody, then obviously throw them in, but we can stick around afterwards. I want to talk a bit about perch fishing and freshwater fishing.
Definitely, it's got to be done.
I think what we might have to do is come back to it on a different talk. We've probably got 5 minutes. I'm just going to touch on your freshwater stuff.
Yeah, sure.
Tell me about where Hobie comes in.
Yeah.
Very quickly.
Yeah, sure.
And then talk to us about kind of Hobie and freshwater as well as saltwater access.
Yeah, sure. Well, look, the big USP about these Hobie kayaks, I don't know whether you can see this, but the big USP, let me grab it and bring it up here. But really, it's about this thing, because you know, most people think of kayaks or canoes, and they think of paddles, right? You use your arms. Well, this thing is it's powered by your legs. Yeah. So it's a bit like a penguin. When if you move those backwards and forwards, Adam, you see how the flippers move. Yeah. Well, that, believe it or not, that propels the Hobie kayak way faster than you could ever paddle. Yeah. It's a very efficient means of getting from A to B. But the other thing, from a fishing perspective, is that your hands aren't tied up holding a paddle. Yeah. So you can fish and move at the same time. Yeah. Which might not sound like a big deal, but if you're a kayak fisherman, it's a massive deal. Yeah, and in tight spaces as well, which is where the freshwater, my perch brain looks at a kayak and just thinks, you know, you can just dot it into the corner, spin it around on a dime. Yeah. And like you said, people think of kayak fishing and they think of paddles. They don't understand you're doing it with your feet. And also, you're doing quite a lot with your hand, aren't you? You're moving that rudder, spinning it round. Someone said to me, it's a little bit like when you're rubbing your tummy and patting your head and doing 20 things all at once. It sounds complicated, but it really isn't. It's really simple. You know, my son, when he was about 6 or 7, I took him out on the Hobie, and I turned my back. I was just about to give him the old man, sad brief about what to do and all the rest of it. I turned round and he was in it, and he was on the river, and he was paddling away, And he just disappeared. It's just intuitive. It is just obvious. You've got the steering, you've got a rudder there. That spins the thing on a sixpence. You can go into reverse with the flippers. Even on quite a fast-flowing river, you can literally hold station. So particularly if you're drop shotting, or you're using your nets, or any technique where you a bit of finesse. Yeah. This thing is an absolute killer, and it really is. I do remember, a couple of occasions I've forgotten the Mirage drive, so I've had to kind of go back to using a paddle. Yeah. And at those points, you suddenly realise what a massive difference that Mirage
just
drive
the whole
makes.
Station.
Oh, huge difference. Yeah. And of course, your legs are a lot stronger than your arms, so you can just keep going all day.
Go all day. Yeah. And also, like you said, you've got a rod. If you've got a paddle, it's just getting in the way, isn't it? So I think, well, the first thing to say is obviously I'd love to get you down to Marine Power and down onto the Broads at some point, and get out on one of these in the freshwater environment. I'd love to do some perch, and I know you love perch. I'd love to talk about it more, and we're going to have to get you back at some point as well. And between this year's show and next year's show, we're going to be making loads of content like this. And we've discussed it, but we are going to go bassing, and we're going to get out and try and catch some perch as well.
Excellent.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for obviously watching our Bullard's Gin final part of the day podcast. We really appreciate that. Thanks everybody here for watching as well. If you've got any questions, Ian's going to stick around for a while. And thank you so much, Ian. It's been a real pleasure.
Adam, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
No worries at all. Cheers, guys.